First off, a clarification. Throughout this series, I've been referring to Tom Holland as an historian. He's not. That is not his professional training. And that's no small deal for someone writing books on history. Just ask this guy, David Barton, Christian historian ordinaire. Professional historian with a PhD in ancient history, no less, my friend Dr. Richard Carrier wrote the following in his essay titled, "No, Tom Holland, It Wasn't Christian Values That Saved the West." I'll put a link in the description below. Quote, novelist Tom Holland just wrote an article for The Spectator titled, "Thank God for Western Values," declaring the debt of the West to Christianity is more deeply rooted than many might presume. Everything he says is false. Holland is another amateur playing at knowing what he's talking about. End quote. It's said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I might add, with the exception of theft. In the last nearly quarter century, there has been a dramatic shift as people sharing my point of view regarding religion and its value to society have stood up, spoken out, and toppled the traditional narrative regarding religion's worth both to individuals and to society at large. If you thought Christianity would take that lying down, you don't know Christianity. For some time now, Christians have been engaged in the kind of historical revisionism which makes the Dark Ages disappear, declares the church the champion of science, women, abolition, and imagines some kind of coherent, if self-serving narrative regarding Western civilization for which we should all be thanking God. One in which we entirely forget how the achievements of the West were secured and simply pat ourselves on the back for having secured them, whatever the cost to others. Case in point, like other Christian excusages, Tom likes to say that it was Christianity and the Judeo-Christian worldview that inspired the abolitionists and ended slavery here in the West. And it only took 5,600 years, according to the Jewish calendar, 2,000 for the Christians. Has there ever been an all-powerful God and religious framework so completely sluggish and impotent? Hey, Tom. Who were those abolitionists fighting, by the way? Tom never bothers to tell us that the abolitionists were doing battle with other Christians, hell-bent on preserving the slave trade. Nor does Tom tell us that the Christians fighting to defend chattel slavery with their very lives here in the States were the Christians who had God's holy word on their side. Quote, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them, you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly." End quote. Michael Jones from the Inspiring Philosophy channel tells us that his all-powerful God had to yield to the culture of the time, that God couldn't give the Israelites a more perfect moral code banning slavery because the Hebrews were not yet ready for such a leap in their moral thinking. Yeah, a people who'd just been emancipated from 400 years of their own bondage couldn't possibly have understood the evil of slavery and the moral failure of viewing other human beings, like it says right there in God's holy word, as property. Nor does Tom Holland mention how American slaves were treated after their emancipation in this glorious Christian nation, embracing the glorious Christian values of segregation, Jim Crow, lynchings, redlining, voter suppression, and all manner of discrimination. Jesus said if someone asks for your coat, give them your cloak also. Former slaves couldn't even get their 40 acres and a mule. Was this the enlightened way to view the world for which we have Christianity to thank? The simple fact is, the Bible is a book which can be made to say damn near anything. A perfect tool for chauvinist, revisionist types like Tom, who uses this fact endlessly to his advantage. The Christian Holy Book is pro-slavery, anti-slavery, pro-woman, anti-woman, pro-peace, anti-peace. Whatever you need it to say in the moment, there's a verse for that, which is why you have to ignore all of it and look at what Christians do. both now and, more importantly, when they had all the power necessary to make the world in their image. That's not a pretty picture, as we've seen. Tom also fails to mention that it is this book which has impeded and retarded moral progress for centuries. Here again, slavery is the perfect example. To end slavery is a confession that God was morally wrong. Hashtag understatement. A fiend, really. A being who allowed, sanctioned, and gave instructions on how to execute a vicious and brutal practice which, if you believe God is all-knowing, then he knew it would lead to millions dying, being raped, tortured, having children and spouses ripped away, etc. Enlightened? Anything but. The real proof in the pudding is that American Christians today who are most devoted to the biblical texts don't like our secular, enlightened, humanist values at all. They often see them as demonic. We have devout Christians in our Congress who want to do away with the separation of church and state. My old buddy Dennis Prager, a devout Jew enamored with the Hebrew Bible, Christianity, and Western Civ, opposes marriage equality and the protections of the 14th Amendment on religious grounds. American Christians finally won their 50-year battle against a woman's bodily sovereignty, turning women once again into second-class citizens. They've embraced discrimination against the LGBTQ+ communities. They constantly try to push religious pseudoscience into the classroom. They ban books about non-white heroes in schools, thwart democracy at every turn, and at this very moment, overwhelmingly devote themselves to a man who now routinely and proudly parrots Adolf Hitler. Enlightenment ideals? No. Christian ideals. The ideals of the Enlightenment were not in any way obvious to the Christians who assumed power in the newly Christian empire of the Latin West, circa 380 CE. Nor were they obvious to Christians in the Latin West 500 years later, even 1,000 years later. Indeed, these ideals are not to be found in the holy books of the Christians and the Jews. Enlightenment ideals evolved outside that framework, outside those Christian waters, as a response and rejection of the Christianity which had turned the Latin West, in almost every way, into an authoritarian police state. Tom likes telling secular humanists like me that I am far more Christian than I know or could even imagine. Just the opposite is true. Christians in the West, with the exception of the fundamentalists and the evangelicals, are far more the children of the Enlightenment than they could possibly know or imagine. It's why we no longer practice biblically sanctioned slavery, imprison or chemically castrate homosexuals, disrespect indigenous peoples, their cultures and languages, have blue laws, see women as less than, and instead revere our godless, secular Constitution. And that's part of the good news for us, secular humanists. They like us. They really, really like us and our values. Okay, well, not all of them. Not the Christians who still express some fealty and devotion to their holy book, and in a particularly pitiful way. Those Christians who prefer pre-Enlightenment Christianity still require constant vigilance and obstruction. But so much of the Christian world has moved on from Christianity that they're now happy to think themselves connected to the movement responsible for all the recent moral, political, and intellectual progress in the West, a movement they fought tooth and nail at the time. The Christian West has been so stripped of its Christianity that Christians are thrilled by the non-version of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who mistakenly sees Christianity not as a means to eternal salvation, but merely as a weapon to beat back Putin, Xi, Islam, and the woke. Having researched this topic for the past several months, part of me is now wondering if Tom Holland isn't a genuine genius, and someone atheist like myself should admire. First, he most certainly must, at this point, along with Ben Shapiro, sleep on a bed made of money, having told Christians that all good things are actually Christian things. And he's done so without converting or professing belief in the resurrection in any way. I have to admit, I'm a little bit more than jealous. Second, while he's told Christians that Enlightenment ideals and values are Christian at their core, I suspect the long-term effect of that will be to persuade many, if not most, of the Christians fawning all over him to embrace the Enlightenment ideals of secular humanism as their own. So long as Christians focus on the actual ideals, I'm happy to surrender credit. Even if Hume, Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu might not be. Losing that battle while winning the war is something I can live with. This is the Enlightenment ideal in a way. Believe what you will personally, but in the public square, let those Enlightenment values prevail. Secularism, meaning the separation of church and state. Religious pluralism, anti-authoritarianism, equality, tolerance, democracy, science and empiricism, religion and persuasion, freedom of thought and speech, etc. Yes, 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 those are all Christian values. Have been from the beginning, from time immemorial. Sure. Once again, I'm me. Thanks for watching.